The Breton-Prétot machine was an experimental wire-cutting device developed in France from November 1914. It was developed by Mr.Prétot, engineer, and Jules-Louis Breton, member of the French National Assembly. Background: the immobility of the trench warfare characterizing the First World War led to a need for a powerfully armed military engine that would be at the same time protected from enemy fire and could move on the extremely irregular terrain of battlefields. Barbed wire especially posed a considerable threat as it was cheap and easy to install, extremely effective at slowing or stopping an offensive by troops against protected fire, and very difficult to eliminate, even with artillery. Special machines were considered to attempt to eliminate this problem. Armored vehicles with the capacity to flatten or otherwise eliminate barbed wire lines. Wheel tractor base. The Breton-Prétot machine was a saw designed to cut the barbed wire protecting enemy trenches of World War I. The first version consisted of a small circular saw, driven by a 6 HP engine, attached to a long lever that was placed on a small cart with 4 wheels that had to be pushed towards its objective. Breton proposed the machine to the French government in November 1914, and a prototype was tried in January 1915. When it was shown that the system in this form had little practicality, the use of caterpillar tracks was discussed that same month, but since none was available at the time, the system was then mounted at Liancourt on the back of a barjack tractor in an attempt to obtain all-terrain mobility. Towards the end of February 1915, the small circular saw was replaced by a large vertical saw with 13 teeth, but a larger horizontal circular saw was added, just above ground level, to cut the barbed wire poles. In July the system was again changed, the horizontal saw being left out and large deflection shields being placed to protect the wheels. 8 small bronze cannon were used as simulation weights. After satisfactory tests on the 22nd of July 1915 at Maison Lafitte, the War Minister Alexandre Millerand ordered 10 armored and armed wire cutters to be manufactured on the 7th of August. Caterpillar base. The barjack agricultural tractor, however, proved not mobile enough. The initial experiment had only tested the wire-cutting ability, and had the severe disadvantage of having to approach the enemy lines driving backwards. Breton and Prétot then considered using some of the 200 American four-wheel drive Jeffrey tractors that had been commanded by the French artillery. When this was refused, Commandant Bessin directed Breton to the Schneider Company, which was working on the Caterpillar track system, under a production license from the American Holt Manufacturing Company. Experiments with the Holt Caterpillar tracks had started in May 1915 at the Schneider plant with the 75 horsepower wheel-directed model and the 45 horsepower integral Caterpillar Baby Holt, showing the superiority of the latter. On the 16th of June, new experiments had followed in front of the President of the Republic, and again on the 22nd of July 1915 in front of War Minister Alexandre Millerand, who decided on the 7th of August 1915 on the construction of 10 armored and armed Breton-Prétot machines. For his machine, Breton was thus allowed to order 10 Holt tractors to use as a base for his wire-cutting machine. Experiments again took place on the 10th of September for Commander Ferris. This order was modified on the 7th of December 1915 into an order to reuse the Caterpillars to produce the first Schneider CA-1 tanks. Sauen experiment finally, on the 9th of December 1915 at Sauen, on a former battlefield with rough terrain and trenches, and in the presence of General Philippe Pétain, a prototype armored vehicle motorized with a baby Holt Caterpillar was tested, with provisions to attach Breton's wire-cutting apparatus to it. Only later, in early 1916, would such a device be actually attached during experiments. These very encouraging tests prompted General Estienne to make a formal proposal on the 12th of December 1915 to build tanks based on a modified lengthened Holt Caterpillar. The 10 Holt tractors were thus finally diverted to the production of the first French tanks of the Schneider CA1 model. The tanks were not equipped with the Breton-Prétot saw, as tests had shown that the tracks alone were sufficient to destroy barbed wire. Because of the connection with the Breton-Prétot saw, Breton convinced himself he had become the leading French expert on armored vehicle design and considered himself to be the true inventor of the French tank. He felt rather piqued when Estienne took over his project. This caused him to cooperate with the rival of Estienne, Colonel Émile François-Élie Couteau-Henri Melot, in the development of an alternative tank, the Saint-Chamond. In 1917, an Allied Interparliamentary Commission even concluded that Breton had a better claim to the invention of the tank than the British. In the post-war controversy on this subject, Breton vociferously defended his position. Modern historians, however, agree that the claim is unfounded.